Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
And here we are, another episode of Redefining Society Podcast. And with me today, there is Jeff Allison. Jeff, how are you today?
Really good, Marco. Very pleased to be here today.
And I'm glad to have you because today we're talking about a topic that is very dear to me. And you have a particular knowledge of a certain area, a certain aspect of this very general topic, which is the environment. Renewable energy is one of the side, polluting is another, and then I'm going to say there is the cleanup of what maybe we have done, and we shouldn't not have done that. But this is for you humans. We do something, and then we're like, whoops, that's maybe we should have done it in a different way. Now we got to do something, and you tell us what is that you do in particular. But again, this is the Redefining Society podcast, and of course, environment, technology, and how it affects our lifestyle and the way we live our life. It's definitely a really relevant topic as we are redefining society in a technological modern world. So with this said, Jeff, a little bit about yourself for our audience, and then we're going to dig in what you do and how we got here and what we can do to get out of this trouble we're in.
Well, thanks, Marco. I'm very pleased to be here. Just a little background on our company. Our company is called Delta CleanTech, Inc., and we're a public company. We're out of Canada, out of Calgary, Alberta, and Regina, Saskatchewan. And really what we are is a company that's been set up to help solve a couple of society's major problems right now. And as the audience probably knows, you've probably heard about greenhouse gases and the fact that CO2 is one of the byproducts of emissions. So whether you have a coal plant or a refinery or a hydrogen plant or whatever, anything that's burning a fossil fuel is going to emit carbon. And that carbon's usually in the form of what they call CO2, which is, as you know, is they call a greenhouse gas. And what happens is when the greenhouse gas goes up into the atmosphere, it creates like a blanket, and it increases the overall temperature of the earth. So there's been a movement now that's been going on for, I'd say at least 20 or 30 years now, which is looking at the world and various protocols to try to get countries around the world to try to reduce their emissions overall so that our average temperature of the world doesn't go up. And we're starting to see some of the effects of that temperature going up, whether it be more and more hurricanes or bad weather or climate change or icebergs melting or glaciers melting and all these different things that are not good for our environment. So what our company does is we've taken a technology that's been around for actually many years, probably since the 1930s. It's called post-combustion amine capture process. And what we do basically is we take the flue gas that comes out of a smokestack, any kind of smokestack really, and then we put it through, there's two columns, and the first column is called what we call the absorber column. And what you do there is you push the flue gas through the absorber column, and then you drop the solvent down from the top. And then that solvent, when it passes the flue gas, it absorbs the CO2. And then what you do is you take it to the other side of the column, which is called a stripper column. And then you add heat to that. And then that boils off the CO2, and you've got CO2 in a pure form. And then that whole cycle repeats itself. So it's a process that's been around for a long time. And what we've done as a bunch of engineers and scientists that work in our company is we looked at ways to make that process more efficient. So ways to reduce the capital costs of building these plants. And so what we do is we use oil field technology, and we build our plants on skids and in a factory setting. And then we looked at ways to reduce the operating costs and that. And basically, 5% improvement here and a 10% improvement there. And at the end of the day, now we have a very commercial technology that is very easy to use and very easy to install. And so we've been working on a number of projects worldwide. We've been in the business for probably about 17 years now. And it's been a fight. As you know, was the original Kyoto protocols and that. And what happened was that, there was a lot of interest in reducing emissions, but countries overall would start pointing fingers at each other and say, well, if China's not going to reduce their emissions, we're not, because then we'll be less competitive, and always lots of reasons not to do it, Marco, and so, we got a lot of engineering studies over the years and stuff, but there's actually been a bit of a fundamental shift in this whole area over the last probably 1 or 2 years now. And there's a couple of things, but one of the main ones is what they call the environmental and social governance movement, which is where companies are saying, or ESG is for short, and they're saying, you have obligations as a company to be able to meet some ESG guidelines. And a lot of the major companies around the world, like, Amazon or Microsoft or all these other companies, are all standing up and saying, we're going to be net zero by 2030. So if you're a large oil company, an Exxon or a Shell or somebody like that, and you're saying we're going to be net zero by you've made these commitments, you've made a legal liability to people that want to invest in your company to say, okay, well, I have a green energy fund and I'm going to invest in your company, Mr. Shell, but I'm investing on the basis of your ESG guidelines that you're telling me. You're saying you're going to reduce your emissions by a certain amount by 2030. And so now, they've made some formal commitments, and the capital people in New York and Toronto and London are also saying the same thing. They're saying, well, you know what, Mr. Oil Company, I'm going to give you the money, but you have to give me your ESG plan. So what are they going to do? Well, there's only a couple things they can do. I mean, obviously, if they reduce their emissions from a lot of their big emitting plants, if you have a big coal plant or a big refinery or a big hydrogen plant that is putting 1,000 tons a day of CO2 into the atmosphere, you need to do something about it. So there's a lot of different technologies around now that are looking at how we deal with this problem. I would say that out of all of them in the world right now that are looking at this, the post-combustion amine process that ourselves and a number of our competitors are using is probably what I would consider to be the most commercial. There's a lot of others, which I call science experiments, which work really good on the bench, but they probably need another 10 or 20 years to try to work out the commerciality. So this whole business really is about starting off by reducing emissions using known technology that's commercial, like ours, building a few plants, reducing the emissions, and then as we go over time, then we can also look at some of the new technologies and new things that we can do. Because at the end of the day, you can't just say, well, let's just give up fossil fuels. Well, that's not realistic, because everybody still drives cars and they still fly in airplanes and they still like plastics and everything you look at your desk right now is probably in one way or another related to a fossil fuel. So what can we do in the interim? Well, the interim thing is to reduce your emissions. So whether it be your power emissions or whether it be your mobile fuel emissions, by using technologies such as ours as kind of a bridging technology. And then at the same time, then you implement some of the more environmentally friendly technologies like wind and solar and tidal power, or potentially in the future, can we get fusion power working and other very interesting new energy technologies? I mean, obviously, if you can duplicate the power of the sun using fusion and create unlimited amount of energy, then Elon Musk and his battery powered cars start to make a lot more sense, don't they? Because now you can charge your car and you don't have to worry about where the power is going to come from. Because if you're charging your car and it's coming out of a coal power plant, kind of doesn't make sense, does it?
Yeah, and you don't have to deal eventually with the radioactive residual of all other techniques that we have.
Or whatever, sure.
Yeah. So you said a lot of things, and my brain started going in. What does the audience would want to know about certain things? And there's a few questions. So allow me to ask you a few, and they may sound stupid, but I don't think there are ever stupid questions.
Never a stupid question.
Exactly. So one is this: it's like, okay, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is typical human. We couldn't foresee this. We couldn't just go in electric 100 years ago, which, by the way, if I learn exactly, the first cars were actually electric. So who knows where we could have gone with that. But apart from that, now we're at a point where we just can't just, as you say, scratch everything. We're too invested in this to just say, yep, from now on, no more jobs in that business, no more jobs in another business. We're just going to reinvent everything from scratch. I understand it's not that easy. So is that something that has clicked lately? You said there has been a switch at a certain point. Okay, we're at a point where I say, technology, different technology has converted together to allow a lot of different things. Car batteries, it's one of those, and it's still developing to incorporate more energy, recharge faster, and having the infrastructure to do that. So what is the situation based on your experience of cleaning up the mess that we have done, given that we need to do steps to get to not produce the leftover that is really damaging the environment? But can we actually get stuff done, like clean this air from CO2 faster than, is it a net gain here, or are we kidding ourselves?
No, absolutely. And I'll tell you, Canada is a good example. It's not often you can brag about your own country, but, one of the things that has happened is, and I think our government realized that, it's a bit of a carrot and stick issue. What is your carrots and what are your sticks? In Canada, they did both. The carrots being that they provided government grants to, if you wanted to build a CO2 capture plant, they'll finance 50% of the cost. They'll also give you tax incentives. And then the stick is really, we've implemented a carbon tax in Canada. That carbon tax currently is $50 a ton, that what you would pay if you're an emitter. So, and then that's going to go up to $130 a ton by 2030. So if you're a large emitter and you're emitting a million tons a year, million tons times $50 this year, and then a million tons times 130, there's a real financial penalty for you not to do something. And on the other hand, the carrot being, if you do something, here's 50% money that's non-repayable. It just goes towards the cost. So what's that effectively done is it got everybody over that hump of pointing fingers and saying, okay, we've got our ESG commitments we got to make, we've got tax incentives, and now, we've got penalties as well. Now, in addition, one more thing that's happened is that our company was involved in a project called the Carbon Capture X Prize here in Calgary. And what that was all about was that the government of Canada and the government of Alberta and some other people put up some money, and they said, here's $10 million, the world, come out and show us. Now we know pretty much how you capture carbon, but what do you do with it afterwards? That's always the biggest challenge. And in the past, CO2 has been used for such things as enhanced oil recovery. I don't know if your viewers aren't aware of what that is, but basically what you do is you take CO2 and you put it into an old oil well, And what CO2 does is it acts like a solvent and almost dissolves the oil. And so what it does is that you can put a bunch of CO2 down hole, and then you put some water behind it and you push it over to the production well, and you can actually take a dead oil well and actually start creating more oil out of there. So that's called enhanced oil recovery. And that's been used quite a bit in Canada, United States, in a lot of the oil fields right now. But the X Prize competition was to look at ways what we can do to make CO2 commercial. And so they put out this competition for $10 million. They had about 140 applicants. And then out of those 140, they selected 5. And it was very interesting. The 5 finalists in Canada, and there was 5 in the United States as well. And there was things like using CO2 to make carbon nanotubes, which is something, carbon fiber is used now in a lot of the materials in airplanes and cars and other things instead of steel and plastic. Things like mixing CO2 with hydrogen and making things like ethanol, which is CO2 vodka, believe it or not, or methanol, which is used in the oil business quite a bit. Injecting CO2 into concrete and so on and so on. Lots of very interesting ways. That the secret really is if you can offset the cost of reducing your emissions, then your cost of capture comes down substantially. So if I can take my CO2 that I've captured and I can sell it, let's say there's a company in New York that makes CO2 based vodka, believe it or not. And so now if I can sell my CO2 and make vodka and sell it, then my cost of capture is going to come down in the long run. And as you can, in some cases,
I'm just wondering how much we have to drink to get rid of all the CO2.
Well, yeah, there is.
I mean, I don't want nothing against that company, but it seems more a marketing pitch than than a real solution.
Absolutely right. But if you add up all the different things that you can do, then
I agree.
You can take a good chunk out of your existing emissions, and then the rest of it. They've got good technology now of putting it underground and permanently storing it and turning it into calcium carbonate or some other kind of rock that makes it permanently sequestered. So there's lots of interesting things, like I said, the ESG and the incentives and the carrots and the sticks and all those things and the other things that you can use it. And also there's food grade CO2, like using it for beer and wine and for the carbonation, beer and pop and all those other things. So
can I ask you something?
Yeah.
What is your take? Because I was listening actually to NPR a couple of and reading something about the green credit and how a company are saying, well, every time that if I understand it correctly, every time that you produce more than what you should, you pollute more than what you should, you pay a penalty, and that penalty is used to finance the removal of the CO2 or reinvest it somewhere. So, and I feel like it's really the way to go. I mean, again, I look at this as a game of, unless there is a synergy of everything, we're not gonna go ahead. That's what I'm thinking from an environmental perspective, right? You need to capture what is there, what is being produced. You need to limit what the one you produce, and you need probably a way to get there. And a lot of people were talking about this green credit just a way to get away with a murder. So,
well, there's a lot of people that argue that, and I would argue the opposite actually, because actually we have a subsidiary company that actually does that. We take the CO2 that we've captured for the companies that we work for, and then we create green credits and we help them trade. So that adds on to the list of incentives, like the carrots, for you to do this. It's another offsetting revenue source that you can add to make it more incentivize you to actually reduce your carbon. And so carbon credits are traded, and they are traded usually by the companies like the Microsofts and the Amazons that actually don't have big smokestacks, but they want to reduce their carbon footprint. So they would buy these. So that cash then comes back, and that does add to the ability of that company to make their carbon capture plant more cost effective. And that's the secret, right? At the end of the day, really, what does it boil down to? It boils down to business, whether you're making money or you're not, right? I mean, you can say, you know, as a company, oh, we're green and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. But at the end of the day, what is it really about? It's about making money, and it's about cost versus revenue, and am I going to do it or am I not going to do it? Well, if all those ESG things are making me do it, and I can find out a good way to do it, and it's going to offset my costs, then I'm going to do it. And that's what we're seeing right now. That's why the people are pounding our doors down to find out about this, and why I'm hiring engineers as fast as I can hire them.
Yeah, and ESG has definitely made a big difference in a switch, maybe in the perception of the consumers. If there is really a value in being a true company, a company that really preach that the walk the talk and that actually does something for the environment, I think the new generation are definitely getting more involved with that. Which brings me to the next question, which is, when we talk about anything in our global economy, we can say, well, Canada is doing this, Italy is doing that, the US is doing this, or maybe California is doing it versus, I don't know, Tennessee is not, or vice versa. And I'm not, nothing against Tennessee. I'm just using two examples. But the point is, this is something that once it goes in the air, there is no borders, right? There is no governance, and the environment is of everyone. I'm not going to be using the overview effect of the astronauts that goes on the, in space and look at the planet, and it's just one. So all of this to say, how hard is going to be, on your opinion, to really put everybody on the same page? And you mentioned that before, China's like, no, I'm not going to do it. India is not going to do it because they have other interests. But at the end of the day, I'm an idealistic guy. I talk about dystopia, utopia, in philosophy and sociology a lot. I'm like, we got one damn planet, and so far we can't really just escape. We don't have the propulsion or the mean to do that. So how is it going, on your opinion, or what the future looks like in terms of really everybody coming together, not just the Paris Act or
Paris
commitment,
Accord.
The Paris Accord, or then people just going to say, no, I'm not going to be part of that, so I don't care. I mean,
that's always been the challenge, right? And that's what I've been fighting for the last 20 years, obviously. I mean, there's lots of idealistic people, and there's lots of people that realize that this emissions problem is real. I mean, there was a lot of, I think you mentioned it earlier, a lot of greenwashing around this thing, where companies would say, oh, well, we're doing this, but they really aren't, but what's happened recently is that every year they have an environmental conference. The last one was COP27, which was the one I was at in Egypt. And, there's all the main countries are there, primarily the G8 countries. And but this year at COP27 in Egypt, all the African countries were there as well. And they all have the same concerns. And I'm detecting that when I talk to the various companies as well around the world, that they're getting serious about trying to do something. They have good intentions, but I have to help them, show them a way that I can make it economic as well, so that when their board of directors can sign off on it. So, that's where we try to help them in Canada, like, for example, with grants. And the United States right now, under the Biden administration, he made emissions reduction as his number 3 platform technology when he was elected. And he's got the 45Q program now, which is good tax incentives for companies to actually do stuff. And any of the things they do in emissions reduction, they can actually write off, which is a big step for the United States, because, the United States was never part of Kyoto back in the early days. They always wanted to say, no, we're not part of this. And we're going to do our own thing. And as a result, nothing was done, like you said. But, I'm cautiously optimistic, because I know the reason I'm saying that is simply this, is that companies are actually putting their money where their mouth is for a change. they're at least doing demonstration plants. They're doing the engineering required to figure out, what it costs and how they're going to do it, and look at all the different technologies, whether they're going to do just an emissions reduction, or whether they're going to mix in some solar power or wind or tidal power or whatever, all the new different, socially responsible technologies. All of them are good. All of them have their setbacks, right? I mean,
Yep.
we saw in Texas during the winter, the fact that if you have more than 15% of your grid is solar or wind, when you get a really cold snap or a really hot snap and all the air conditioners kick in or all the heaters kick in, you can't meet the demand for electricity that you need. Like a coal plant, you can just turn it up and you got more power. Whereas solar, I mean, if the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing, that's it, right?
Yep.
So there isn't any one solution that I can say to you, yeah, this is the way to go, because there isn't. It's a mix. You got to have a little bit of solar. You got to have a little bit of wind. You got to have some fossil fuels. You got to maybe have some nuclear. Nuclear isn't popular either. Because you see what happens if there's the leaks. So, and obviously, if you can get fusion power, hallelujah, right?
That's true. Listen, let me something just to give an idea, to me, which I don't know enough about it, and to the audience. So this cleanup process of what you do, the CO2, you take it, you explain the technology you use. I know there are other technology out there. Kind of quickly read here and there. What all of those combined together, in percentage, how much it influence the outcome for the environment? If you put it on a scale.
Well, I can say this is that if there was a serious implementation of the technology that we use, that we could 100% reduce the emissions in the world. That's it. But what would it cost? It would cost many billions, many trillions, right?
So is the cost of adoption still too high? Meaning, I don't know, I'm thinking so here's me with my fantasy world, right? So yeah. I go to Tokyo, not Kyoto, but Tokyo. You mentioned Kyoto before. Tokyo. All the buildings, most of them, they have a garden on the roof, right? Yeah. Great. You buy something, buy this pen, and we're going to plant a tree. So I agree with you. Everything works, right? Where is going to be that time, or what is needed from a technological perspective to reach that cost where, I don't know if it's even possible, that on every building there is some machine that clean up the air? I'm going sci-fi probably here, but are we really that far?
No, that isn't sci-fi. There's for example, one of our competitors have the air capture technology.
Yeah.
And, where they just capture the CO2 out of the air. Well, if you just think about it, the amount of electricity or energy that's required to get such a small percentage of CO2 that's in the air to work just doesn't make any sense. Okay. So, is there ways to do stuff differently? Yeah, there is. What we really need, though, is we need what's happening right now in Canada is we need more companies to start to be the forerunners and show you that this can work, and actually they can sell their CO2 and make some money, and it isn't such a hard cost to you. And then it's just like anything, the more of these you build, the better you get at them, and the more the cost comes down. If you can start production lining some of this stuff and maybe getting standard units that you've worked out in 5 other situations that are similar, then you don't have to re-engineer everything, and it's your costs start to come down, and that goes with anything, doesn't it? Right? The more stuff you make out of a certain thing, the better are you get at it, and that's the same. There's no difference in this business. I'm not expecting that my solution is going to be the ultimate solution, but it's at least a solution for now that works. It's commercial, and I'm not prepared to put guarantees behind it.
Mm-hmm.
But is there going to be something better in the future? Yeah, probably. So am I always keeping my eyes open? I mean, it's no different than if you're in the IT business, right? If you don't keep your eyes open, it's going to be long before somebody comes along with a better software than you have, and you're out of business in a month or two,
First adoption is important, but you got to maintain it too.
Oh, of course. You got to always keep your eyes open, looking over your shoulder. Don't get too comfortable with where you are, because there's always somebody with a better mousetrap, isn't there?
Absolutely. So let's wrap this conversation with really a look into, I don't know, the future. Of course, you're optimistic about it. You wouldn't be in this business if you were not. Like,
Yeah.
You have a solution that works. That you've been very positive in terms of where the government are coming together. And I mean, honestly, we don't have a choice. I mean, it's either that or it's a post-atomic scenario, even not necessarily atomic, but it's going to look not too good. So let's finish with a positive note. Do you expect some kind of technology to come together? I mean, do you believe that I'm not going to keep you accountable for that, but in many years we can probably look back and be like, wow, we were really in a bad shape, and now we're really getting somewhere. I don't know what kind of technology and societal, cultural changes have to happen, but what is your futuristic view on this?
Well, all I can say is, out of all the years that I've been involved in the business, this last year has been the most promising to me, because there's people are actually doing stuff now versus just talking. They're actually spending money, and they're actually evaluating their own assets. Now, whether they do something at the end of the day, some of them are, some of them aren't. Some of them might just buy credits. They might decide that that's a better way to go for their company, is to buy carbon credits. But at the end of the day, like I said, if they buy somebody's carbon credit, somebody's actually created that through their own plant. And the guys that create it, like the first guys in, are the guys that are going to be first of all, are going to be able to take advantage of the government funding that's available, because that won't be around forever. So, the first guys in are obviously going to be, I think, the best off. Where's it going to go? Well, like I said earlier, you can't just say, well, we're going to go wind, we're going to go solar, we're going to cut off, gasoline, or we're going to do this, or, it's a mix, So am I confident? I'm really confident that the smart guys that are working on all these research projects in California and the UK and Korea and other places are going to come up with a workable solar reactor, or workable, fusion reactor, and is that maybe 20 years away? It maybe is, but in the meantime, can we bridge something? And that's what we hope to do as a company.
Yep.
We want to bridge, at least start the decline in the amount of emissions, or at least the leveling off the emissions. And then from there, then we also will implement, more electrical cars, or more efficient ways to burn stuff, or using less energy in the things that we do. It's not one thing. It's everything that everybody's doing to solve this problem is the answer.
Yep. And I'm glad you end up with this, because it is my message. It's kind of the message of ITSPmagazine in general. We have many different podcasts. Some are cybersecurity, some are hosted by astronauts that brings technology that we use in space and explain how then we adopt it here. So, and I think the moral of the story is, don't do nothing just because you don't think is enough, right? I mean, that you said that in so many different ways, and that's what I want to say as well. That even a little bit, and you actually, thank you for making me understand the green credit system, because I was not a believer in that, but the way you present it, I'm like, okay, it's part of that system that may work. in the end. So
It is.
cool, very cool. Well, I want to thank you for taking your time here to sharing what you do, what you're doing with your company, but also your vision. And I hope that the audience would have a much more clear idea about what is happening right now in this industry. And for anybody that wants to get in touch with Jeff, there will be links to the company, links to his personal social media account if you want to share it. And they will be in the notes for this episode. So if you're watching the video, there's also a podcast. Be sure to subscribe. And if you're listening to the podcast audio, you want to watch the video, not much to see. It's me and Jeff, but hey, we're here, and there is a lot more other hosts from ITSP Magazine on our YouTube channel. So check it out. Thank you so much, Jeff. It was a real pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, real pleasure, Marco. Appreciate it very much, and good luck to you in your business.
We hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you learned something new and this story made you think, then share ITSP Magazine with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our columns. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.